the money that was spent, the players that were signed at a time with a flat cap, Brian Lawton, what the heck is going on in the National Hockey League?
I think you answered your own question. It's the flat cap, not nearly as much. It's a really strange time. I mean, I talk to a lot of GMs. A lot of guys are disappointed in terms of it's been difficult to plan for a pandemic and what that has done to the cap in terms of their long-term plans. But that's what they found themselves dealing in. And it's been really tough. People, you see what Tampa's had to do, moving out name players like Ross Colton and Corey Perry and Patrick Maroon, Bellemare, and bringing in guys, not that they're not NHL players, but Calvin DeHaan, Josh Archibald, Luke Glendening. This is where the world is at right now. It's been tough, and yet some teams have done some nice work. You have to give them credit. Toronto's been active, but the other dynamic that people aren't talking enough about for me, John, is that players always love long-term deals, and they still would be signing them this year if the money were better. But you're seeing guys like Bertuzzi that are saying, hey, the cap's going to go up next year. Everybody knows that. There's very little escrow left to pay, less than $70 million. Once that's done, you can expect the cap to go up in a meaningful way again.
Yeah, it's just, also Alex Killorn, right? He ends up going out west from Tampa. And what do you think that the idea of going short term, just waiting for it to go up is something that we saw, as you mentioned, with Bertuzzi is kind of the new thought, but then, you see other guys like Killorn take some years and obviously Ryan O'Reilly with a 4-year deal in Nashville.
Yeah, I mean, some guys it's predicated on age, and you can't. Bertuzzi's a younger player; he can afford to do it, and many players can, but not everybody can. And Alex Killorn, he had a really great year last year. He's a really good player. He was there when I was in Tampa, just still in college, but in our camps. He's had a magnificent career, but this is his last chance to really cash in. Yeah. And Anaheim stepped up and did what other people aren't willing to. There's a number of teams that have that capability, but signing, some of these players at this point in their career doesn't really make a ton of sense for them in terms of the cycle they're in and where they're going to be. And, in Anaheim's case, I feel like Beaker knew Alex from his time in Tampa, really loved him, knew he'd be a culture guy. And even though, in my opinion, I don't think they're ready to win yet, I think they know that. They may not admit that, but they are definitely rebuilding. And it's a strange signing for sure. But I think that Alex Killorn did not have a boatload of options. And if he wanted term, if you're looking at your age, it's a great decision for him. And he'll be a great guy for Anaheim.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing, Brian, in many ways of what we saw was, and we've seen this in the league, and we've talked about this before, the have teams and the have not teams. Well, the have not teams have all the cap space. So exactly. you look at Anaheim with the guy with giving Killorn that long-term deal. Look what Arizona is continuing to do with what Bill has been able to sign more players. I was shocked at the amount of signing he was doing. Even Steve Yzerman, the amount of bodies that Detroit who had a ton of cap space. So I don't know if this is the great equalization, but it's a fascinating time. The other one is Chicago, and I tell you what, if I'm a manager of another team, I am pissed off at Chicago.
Yep.
Because of 2 contracts.
Yep.
The Nick Foligno contract and the Corey Perry contract, because they set the bar.
$4 million for those guys who were making less, and they're both really valuable guys. I love Nick.
But $4 million?
And that seems absurd for them at this stage in their career, and yet I can't say a bad word about those guys. They're quality people. They play hard. The only reason they're getting that money, you have to be honest, is they're racing to the floor, right? They're not racing to the ceiling. They're racing to the floor of the salary cap, and this is the dichotomy you're speaking about, that you have these teams like Tampa, Toronto's been crushed, Edmonton is crushed in terms of salary cap space. The Rangers are crushed, that are dying for more salary cap space. And then you have the teams like Chicago that are going through the Connor Bedard era, which should be really good for them. And they got too much cap space.
Yeah.
That they can turn around and grab Corey Perry. Now, you have to think, John, that and Matt, that those teams are going to end up paying half and trying to move those players at the deadline. So, is that a bad strategy? What does that mean? Paying half means you really pay 3/4,
Nope.
right?
The only, just let me jump in here for a second, Matt. The only thing I can think of is that Kenny Holland is sitting there negotiating with Connor Brown, and he's talking to Connor Brown, and he probably figures he's got him at 2.5. He's probably, and then all of a sudden, $4 million for Foligno, $4 million for Perry. Comparables, man. It's one of the things when you deal in the hockey world, you have comparables. So Connor Brown's got to find a way to get to $4 million, and they did it with a couple of bonus structure things that for games played that Connor Brown's now making $4 million.
Well, he's technically making $775, but yes, I hear you.
Yeah,
he
you're
is
right.
making $4 million if he can show up and make it from one blue line to the next.
If he has a
$4
pulse,
million,
basically,
yes.
If he has a pulse, he will make $4 million.
Yes, and quite frankly, Edmonton's in win mode. I don't begrudge them for doing it. It's a smart move. I would say that one flipped on its head at the last minute because of exactly what you're saying. You still have to march to the market. The market hasn't been great for players, but in that particular slice or instance, for a few guys, it's been incredible. I just would not, if you had told me that before free agency opened, and a lot of teams, they're doing the same types of exercises that we would run through to say, what do you think about this? What are your guesses here and there? A lot of teams are doing that same thing. And just like you and I and all of us on this call, Matt, there's just no way we would have came up with that number.
What do you think? Because you saw him up in Minnesota. What do you think of Ryan Reeves to the Toronto Maple Leafs?
My takeaway from Toronto more holistically is that Brad, he hasn't been there yet, so he hasn't been around the locker room, but he's clearly, making moves that are more focused in terms of culture and improving the room. That dovetails with what you're saying about Ryan Reeves. Ryan Reeves is really an extension of the coaching staff. He's going to do all the things you want him to do. He takes it seriously. He's got a big presence, obviously. He's a little bit of the last or a dying dinosaur, so to speak, in that he still does a job that is incredibly important to a team, but vanishing to some degree in the NHL. He's really one of the last guys that can bring that kind of cachet to that role. And he's been able to leverage that into the ability to raise the group. Billy Guerin loved Ryan Reeves. He would have loved to bring him back. He knows what he did to the room. Billy was a culture guy. He wasn't unserious, but Billy was a very affable guy. Ryan has a little bit of that in him, but eventually you want someone to kind of grab your room and shake everybody. And I think Brad has made a bet that if Toronto is going to go deeper, we're going to need to improve that element. They've got a really good team. Toronto's going to have a great season this year, but if they don't have a great playoff, then it feels like a loss for them.
Well, but here, they have made lots of changes to the forwards.
Yes.
But Brian, let's look at the Stanley Cup champions and look at the strength of that team. And as good as Eichel were, or Mark Stone were, and Marchessault, when you have studs on the back end like Pietrangelo and Martinez, and I could name all 6 guys. That's how nuts it was. That's how good and deep they were. The Maple Leafs need to fix the defense.
They do.
Big time.
And it's the number one criticism I've always had when Kyle was there, who I thought did an awesome job, but he just was obstinate in terms of reallocating his money to get more into the D. And if you can't go out and find cheaper players, which is 5 times as hard. You've got to have that asset allocation where your D is meaningful. I've said this on your show. I say it on most shows. Everybody has a different flavor for how you build your team. So this is really sensitive to me because I've been asked this question in GM interviews, and it's always from the blue line in both directions for me. That's just my personal flavor. Some guys will say you need a great goalie. Some guys will say you need strength down the middle. But for the teams I played on that had better seasons, it was always teams that had really great D. I felt like it controlled the game. You can have a bunch of really good forwards and not do anything in the playoffs. This is a hint, hint, wink, wink for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So no, they have not addressed that yet. They have made changes. But that in the end will be their Achilles heel if they don't get over the hump.